basically said, in my experience, I believe you have at least 10 years, if not decades. So I suppose it's probably best for me to bring you up to speed with what is motor neuron disease. Motor neuron disease is a neurological problem. It affects the nerves that control your muscles. And those nerves will slowly, or in some cases quickly, malfunction, stopping you to be able to use your muscles, your limbs, and eventually even breathing. I was diagnosed with motor neuron disease in June 2021. And this is my story. So I was your average 30-something-year-old, and I am married with 3 children. And one day I come back from a run as I was training for a half marathon, and I used to run quite religiously. And one night I come home and noticed a twitch in my left arm. Didn't think anything of it. Showed my wife, put it down to something like adrenaline or maybe even like a trapped nerve. So as time went on, I noticed that arm started to feel heavy and slightly weaker. So it prompted me to book a doctor's appointment, who then gave me a blood test, and the levels on that blood test come back to a point where it was deemed necessary to refer me to a neurologist. I think it was a test to see what sort of protein you had in your body or your bloodstream, and that then prompted them to refer me to a specialist. So I went to see a general neurologist who went and examined me. I shared my sort of story and symptoms that I currently had, and what they then do is eliminate everything other than the worst case scenario, which in this case is motor neuron disease, or ALS. So the neurologist then referred me to get a MRI scan and also what's called an EMG test. If you don't know what an EMG test is, it's basically a machine that is like lots of little sticky pads they put over your body to measure what an electrical current does to your muscles. And the other one, which is a bit more invasive, and that is like a little needle that they run almost, I think it's like a little microphone that they stick inside your muscles, just underneath the skin, and it will measure what your muscles are doing or what your nerves are doing to the muscles when the muscles are twitching. I said muscles quite a lot, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. And I had those 2 tests. The MRI come back perfectly fine, and the EMG test come back inconclusive. So I went back to see the neurologist, who gave me these results and basically said, look, we don't know what you have at the moment. Give it a few more months, say 3 to 6 months, and let's re-look at you then after some time to see if anything progresses. At that point, literally the day after that appointment, lockdown happened here in the UK, and the whole world was literally locked down. So I was left with uncertainty to know what I had and what the issues I was experiencing, and I just went through lockdown like everyone else. Enjoyed a little bit of a drink, enjoyed the lovely weather we had here in the UK, and when lockdown restrictions were slightly lifted, I was then able to go back to work, and it was at that point that I noticed not only my left arm was twitching, my right arm started twitching as well. So I then called the neurologist and explained the situation, and he basically said, look, doesn't sound great, let's get you booked in for another EMG test. Now the first EMG test that I had was relatively okay. They just did little areas of my body, so they did my hands, my arms, predominantly where the twitching was. This EMG test, however, was a lot more invasive, and I swear he put the needle in sort of deeper because he kept hitting a nerve everywhere on my body, and the pain was just awful, and I would not want to go through that again. But it is needed to eliminate other neurological problems to hopefully get a diagnosis of something else that is much more, let's say, manageable. So I waited for these results. I had to go back in to see the neurologist, and he wanted to book me in to see him on the Christmas Eve of 2020. And that feels a lifetime away now. So yeah, 2020, Christmas Eve, he wanted to see me, and something in me said, look, I'm going to rebook this appointment because I don't want to go to the hospital to see him on Christmas Eve. So I rescheduled the appointment, I think it was for January, to go and see what my EMG test results were. And unfortunately for me, the progressive nature of what we were hoping it wasn't, which is motor neuron disease, progressed in such a way that I felt a lot weaker in my left arm. And at that point, nothing was happening with my right arm, it was just twitching. And he gave me the news that not only me, but everyone going through this probably didn't want to hear. And he said, based on your symptoms and what you're experiencing, I think it's motor neuron disease. And I'm like, wow. I just felt like the world was caving in on me. And we still were in a slight restriction from COVID, so I couldn't even go to this appointment with my wife. So I was on my own with a mask on, couldn't see the doctor, couldn't see his nurse next to him, and couldn't read sort of facial expressions. So it was very clinical, and he gave me the worst news that I was hoping it wasn't. So he then referred me to a neurologist that specialised in motor neuron disease. He was pretty sure that I had the condition, and he wanted to get a second opinion from a specialist. At that point, I just didn't know what to think, and I was on my own. I had to walk out the hospital and ring my wife, and just was the first time I think I even cried over the phone with her. And I've been with my wife since I was 19 and I'm 39 now. So yeah, emotions were high. I didn't really know what to think, but we then had this second opinion. So in my mind, I was thinking, have I got motor neuron disease? Is he wrong? Could there be a glimmer of hope that there's something else that is mimicking this disease? And I had to wait so long for this appointment. There's a 6 to 12 month lead time to see the neurologist that he referred me to. And I did everything in my power to, dare I say, make a nuisance of myself to his secretary to try and get to see him sooner rather than later. And those 6 months didn't ever materialise, because I managed to see him after I think it was about 3 to 4 months after my initial, I think you have motor neuron disease, from the general neurologist. So I went to go and see this neurologist. This time I was able to take my wife and had some sort of support there. Really nice guy, and he looked at all my reports and tests. Didn't want to refer me to get any other tests done, so another EMG test or an MRI. He felt that due to physically examining me, seeing what weakness that I've experienced, and what I mean by that, I don't know whether you can see, it's basically, before I tell you what I was diagnosed with, which I'll share with you in a minute, it's affecting just my arms, so I can't, that's as far as I can lift my arms. I can't lift my arms to the side of me or in front of me. And with everything that he had recorded, he agreed with the first neurologist and said, look, it's not what you want to hear. You have got motor neuron disease, but I won't diagnose you just yet. I would recommend you to go and see a third neurologist, was a professor of neurology specifically specialising in motor neuron disease. And he was based in a hospital in Oxford University. So I then had to wait another couple of months for this appointment to come through, and just didn't know what to think. Have I got motor neuron disease? Have I not? All this time my arms are still twitching. I feel weaker in my left arm, and I had to wait for the third appointment to come through. And me and my wife took a trip up to see this professor. At this point, my wife was heavily pregnant with our third, our little girl. As you can probably imagine, emotions were on another level. And with all the uncertainty of what the first two neurologists has sort of given me, I was going into this appointment to see the professor with high hopes that he might turn around and go, no, I reckon it's something else. But after about half an hour with him, he officially diagnosed me with motor neuron disease. I think I need a coffee after that. So, seen 3 neurologists, finally get the diagnosis that I was hopefully not going to get. My wife just burst into tears. I didn't know what to think. I almost felt like there was a bit of closure on what I was experiencing, so I could actually know exactly what I had. Emotions were high. We almost had a bit of closure on what I was experiencing, and then we had to learn how to live with and manage motor neuron disease. So that brings you up to June 2021. What's been going on since then? When I was diagnosed, I was officially given the diagnosis of limb onset ALS. And from what I can understand from sort of the paperwork, the diagnosis, research, is that it starts in your limbs and it will potentially go to the next limb, so on and so on and so on, and slowly go, or in some cases quickly go through your body. And what I mean by that is when he diagnosed me, the professor basically said, you are showing very, very slow progressive signs of motor neuron disease, and what normally happens if it starts slow, it will continue on being slow. And I remember when I was sat in the room after my diagnosis was official, I looked at my wife and see her crying, and I asked the question, how long have I got? And he basically said, in my experience, I believe you have at least 10 years, if not decades. So 10 years. It's not long, is it? But it's a lot longer than people that I have known over the last few years since being diagnosed. Most people will survive roughly around 2 to 5 years from diagnosis. So dare I say, I count myself relatively lucky that I have a slow progressive version, which is why I am now sort of concentrating on raising as much awareness as I can by sharing my story and almost like trying to be a voice for the MND and ALS community, trying to answer questions with videos like this and sharing my journey on other social media platforms. And that's what I've been concentrating on since I have had my diagnosis. Now, I was working at the time. I was a fully qualified barber, but I had retrained over lockdown, and that almost gave me an indication to see how my weakness was progressing, because as you can imagine, every day I'm using my hands, using my arms, and it got to the point about 2 years after my diagnosis that I had to unfortunately give up the job I absolutely loved. I retrained to do something that I wanted to do for absolutely ages, and I wish I did it sooner. And if any of you are watching this or listening to this, I encourage you, if you ever want to do something, don't let a terminal illness, in my case with motor neuron disease, spur you on to do something that you've always wanted to do. Do it now. You've got one life. It is short enough even without motor neuron disease or a terminal illness. Focus on what you can do and not what you can't. And that's exactly what I am doing since my diagnosis. So I've left work. I am now pretty much a stay-at-home dad. There's not a huge amount of things I can do with my arms now. I'm very, very weak in my left arm. My wife has to help me put my coat on, and I do struggle to use things like cutlery, writing with a pen or a pencil. Even typing on a keyboard just becomes really exhausting. Try and live the best life I can do while dealing with this condition. And I've got 3 children that keep me extremely busy and almost keeps my mind off having motor neuron disease until they ask me to pick them up or chase them around the garden and things like that. I'm fairly content with where I am at the moment. That's pretty much it. That's my journey with motor neuron disease. And that's where I am pretty much now. I will be doing a video on things that have helped me, things that haven't helped me, like vitamins and supplements and diet. So stay tuned for the next episode that I'll be putting out. But that is episode 1 of my YouTube channel done. So if you have any questions in relation to this video, please feel free to drop them down in the comments. Subscribe to the channel as well. Give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you on the next one.